Hi everyone, and welcome to the Van Riper Hopper House, located right here in Wayne Township, New Jersey. The Van Riper Hopper House is one of 3 buildings that make up the Wayne Museum, including the Meade Van Dyne House out back and the Schuyler Colfax House over on Hamburg Turnpike. The Van Riper family lived here from the 1780s all the way up until the 1920s, and the museum today tells the story of a typical farming family throughout the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. While the Van Ripers first moved to Wayne in the 1760s, the human history of the township goes back thousands of years. The Munsee Lenape lived along rivers, streams, and brooks in the area, hunting and fishing, and growing crops like corn, beans, and squash. Today, the objects they left behind, like stone tools, pottery, and bones, can help us to understand the experience of indigenous individuals here in Wayne. In 1695, the first Dutch colonists came to the region, negotiating the sale of about 5,500 acres from the Munsee Lenape in return for wampum and other goods valued at 250 English pounds. The Van Ripers were one of many Dutch families that moved to New Jersey from the Netherlands in the 1600s and eventually settled in Wayne. In the 1760s, a man named Richard Van Riper purchased about 150 acres of land here in the northern portion of Wayne, then an area called Preakness, part of Saddle River Township, part of Bergen County. Today, Point View Reservoir takes up a large portion of this property, but in the 18th century, it was Richard Van Riper's farmland. From his 1807 estate inventory, a list of property taken after his death, we know that Richard owned cows, pigs, sheep, chickens, and had beehives. We also know that he grew corn, grain, hay, and potatoes, like many other farmers in the area. His crops and livestock were tended to by at least 6 enslaved African-American individuals. Richard and his wife, Elizabeth Meade, had 7 surviving children. In 1786, about 10 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed, their eldest son Uriah married the quite literal girl next door, Maria Burdan, whose family gave Burdan Ave its name. According to his will, Richard gave the newlyweds a portion of his original property. The couple built the Van Riper Hopper House on this land. Today, the house has 2 stories and over 10 rooms, but when the first part of it was built in the 1780s, it was probably much smaller. Many of the early Dutch homes in Wayne were 1 or 2 rooms, with cellars below and lofts above. We currently interpret our historic kitchen as this 18th century space. The fireplace would have been used for heat, cooking, and other chores. The Van Ripers would have been used to a multi-purpose style of living, adjusting furniture when needed to accommodate a variety of daily activities. Like many other families in Wayne, Uriah and Maria developed their property as a farm. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly what they grew. However, according to surviving records, we know that after his father's death, Uriah purchased a cowbell and a butter churn from his father's estate, so we can assume the Van Ripers owned cows. In the 18th century, long before Walmart and Stop and Shop, the Van Ripers and other farming families not only produced goods for local markets, but also relied on their farms for basic necessities. From the 1780s into the early 1800s, the Van Riper Hopper House was occupied by Uriah, Maria, their 2 children, and Anik, an African-American woman who was enslaved by the family. Uriah purchased Anik from his father's estate in 1817. According to census records, Anik lived and labored on site until the 1860s. The Van Riper family's farm and lifestyle relied on Anik's labor. Using advertisements for enslaved women as an example, we can assume that Anik spent a lot of her time in the family's kitchen, tasked with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and spinning, along with other domestic and agricultural tasks. Unfortunately, we don't know much about Anik's personal life. According to birth records, she had 2 children, Cuff and Dinah, but we don't know what happened to them. Between 1840 and 1850, Anik appears to have been freed, but she continued to live and work on site until 1860. While Wayne remained largely rural and focused on agriculture up until the 1950s, the 19th century saw the beginning of industrialization in the township. Transportation features like toll roads, the Morris Canal, and railroads made it easier to travel to and from Wayne, bringing summer tourists and visitors into the township and moving agricultural produce out. Several mills were established in Wayne, as well as a brickyard and a black powder factory. Development in Wayne also led to a shift away from subsistence farming. Wayne residents still didn't shop at Target, but they did have an increased access to manufactured goods. With all this development, many families in Wayne took the opportunity to expand their smaller 18th century homes. While we don't know the exact stage of construction, the Van Ripers probably expanded the home in stages over the course of the 19th century, adding extra bedrooms and a parlor as a distinctly social space. This expansion was part of the family's growing local prominence. Uriah Van Riper's grandson, also named Uriah, was even memorialized as the best-known man in Passaic County, probably because of his job as a tax assessor. The parlor would have been the site of social gatherings, where the family hosted political allies, church friends, and family members. The Van Ripers had close ties all over the township and had friends and family in Fairlawn and Patterson. Mary Ann Van Riper was the last Van Riper descendant, and the only woman, to inherit her family home. Its modern name, the Van Riper Hopper House, comes from her 1872 marriage to Andrew Hopper. The couple lived in the home with their 7 surviving children and several paid farm workers. After Mary Ann's death in the 1920s, the Van Riper Hopper children sold the property, and though it passed through several hands and was almost in danger of being torn down during the construction of Point View Reservoir, it was eventually purchased by Wayne Township and opened as a museum in June 1964. Today at the Van Riper Hopper House, we're striving to tell the stories of Wayne's diverse and fascinating population, from farming families to enslaved individuals to local author Albert Payson Terhune. Come visit us or check out our website, thewaynemuseum.org, to learn about Wayne's history, our tour hours and admission, our upcoming events, and more. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you soon.